Fellas, I tend to use the word cursed rather loosely in this channel, as I tend to give that denomination to builds that are a bit on the wacky side of things, but that end up showcasing some sort of success. However, on today's video we are gonna go over what I'd consider to be sitting right on the edge of the cursed spectrum. This is a nice crush assassin, but we are building with holopalm. Now this right here is some of the most wacky crap I've put out in recent times. For the unaware, unarmed attacks have a 0% chance to crit, and this translates into pretty much having zero reason to grab crit notes on the tree because you won't really be able to scale off any sort of crit chance or crit damage. However, through the magic of influenced mods, a Watcher's Eye, the assassin himself, and a Bottle Fate, we can turn things around. Maybe not for the better, but you'll be the judge of that. And as we all know, Harvest is getting a rather substantial nerf next league, so I figured I might as well give it a go before I regret not playing with it at a later date. Having said that, this is not a build guide, unless of course you're up for a rather wacky challenge. The purpose of this video is pretty much me talking about the experience of playing something like this, and I put out this warning beforehand because it is a rather janky setup. Not only is it hard to gear, and this late into the league it's even harder to do so, but it is also severely limited in some aspects, though you'll see what I mean in a bit. Anyways, hey, if you enjoyed tonight's video, don't forget to subscribe, otherwise a rating and a comment are always appreciated. So now, let us magically stumble into the endgame and miraculously achieve success with a rather questionable build. Alright, so as I said, this is not a build guide, but I still want to point out some of the gear and tree choices I made to try and justify this ungodly abomination. As I mentioned, we are building for critical strikes as a holopalmer. This is a rather tough challenge because unarmed attacks have a base crit chance of 0%. In order to acquire some crit chance, I decided to get it through the Elder modifier, attacks have flat crit chance on body armors, and through a Watcher's Eye that gives even more flat crit chance while using Hatred. Besides that, we're gonna take any crit chance between the Shadow Start and the Duelist areas. This means global crit stuff, dual wielding crit, and some melee crit. We're also gonna use precision, and in the main skill setup we want an inspiration support. Optimally, anomalous inspiration for some extra crit chance. If you can cram crit chance into the jewels, that is great, but with my current setup and while having power charges, the character has a crit chance of 37%, which isn't terrible, but it's still a bit low. It is during boss fights or single target encounters that we can boost this further, by drinking both a Diamond Flask and a Bottle Fate. This is going to drastically increase the crit chance, but it's mostly for these kind of boss fight situations. As for the rest of the gear, it is a standard holopalm procedure, as much resistances, life and dexterity anywhere and everywhere you can get it. However, I also decided to get a bit fancy with this setup. For example, the body armor is an Awakener slammed body, where I combined Frenzy's on Hit from Redeemer influence and increased dexterity from Elder influence. While I am aware that Redeemer can roll the increased dexterity, the difference comes from being able to slam attack crit chance through Harvest. This is why I combined those mods first, before taking the crit chance into account. After all, we want as much dexterity for a holopalm build. Though in the future, once Harvest gets adjusted, you are better off with an Elder body armor that has the crit chance to attacks, increased dexterity and if possible the life and increased life, since in the future you won't be able to modify influenced items through Harvest unless you are slamming influenced modifiers. So at the end of the day, while that sounds a little bit difficult to get, it will probably be a bit more realistic than Awakener slamming two body armors together and hoping to get the modifiers we require. Another fancy thing is slamming the boots with a Redeemer Exile, hoping to get Fizz as extra cold on an open prefix, and if you don't get that, fixing it through Harvest. You know, for a bit more damage, though mine are missing an enchantment. I am also using an Onslaught ring because fuck it, why not, right? The other ring has Frostbite on hit. Again, pretty standard procedure. The belt is a Stygian Vice with both increased attributes and increased life. And I know that a synthesis base is superior, but we'll go over that choice in a bit. You probably realized why I did this, but we'll explain that one in a sec. Though the one thing that I am absolutely proud of is the amulet. This late into the league, amulets with a chunky amount of dexterity are stupid expensive. So in order to circumvent that, I got a fractured amulet that had tier 2 all attributes locked in and spammed Essences of Sorrow to force dexterity. I stopped once I got the crit multi and bench crafted life, which ended up being way cheaper than getting something similar. However, there is a growing concern with this character which adds even more unnecessary challenge to the build in the long run, and you probably already noticed it, and that issue is the life. It is no secret that cramming life into a holopalmer is rather difficult. The route we take on the tree often pushes us away from the juicy life clusters. This guy is no exception, especially since we are focusing on crit as well. At the same time, the gear and the modifiers we're looking for are rather specific. This in turn makes getting as much life as possible one hell of a challenge. This is also due to the random nature of slamming stuff through harvest. For example, in the body armor I was able to remove unnecessary prefixes, but the slamming of life modifiers was not benevolent. I hit 38 life on the first augment life, and hit 45 to remove an add life. The next augment life hit tier 2 increased maximum life. I figured that I could play with that amount, but if someone else was to follow my footsteps, that body armor needs more life, a lot more. The amulet is also lacking a nice amount of life. But then again, augmenting life has the added risk of rolling crappy rolls, which is why I kept this benchcraft. This reasoning is also why I am using a Hunter Stygian Vice instead of a synthesized belt. I lost a good chunk of DPS, but it had to be done. I was running around with less than 5k life, and that was not a fun experience. However, RNG did smile upon this build eventually, since the Lethal Pride I am using on the duelist area is giving me 2 times increased maximum life modifiers. In all honesty, this Lethal Pride is actually pretty nice in this area. It is also giving me melee damage twice and a chance to deal double damage. And as I always say, you gotta pay attention to the rolls inside the Lethal Pride's area. You can get some nifty bonuses here that can be easily skipped on. But the challenge doesn't end there. As you all know, chaos resistance is kinda mandatory nowadays. A lot of things are dealing flat chaos, extra chaos, poison, etc., and skipping it can be a death sentence. In my case, I am running around with negative 60 chaos resistance. This obviously is not optimal, and while I could sacrifice some suffixes on the belt and a ring to force chaos resistance, this also means using harvest until I can push the chaos res into the positives. The problem with all of this is that you start becoming dependent of harvest, since you know, most of your gear is kinda obscure enough that getting something similar is either gonna be super expensive or it doesn't exist. And again, this late into the league, it's both harder and expensive to patch those holes on the build. And to be honest, it kinda gets annoying past the point to rely on a mechanic that is going to get nerfed in the future. So I chose to run around with the current setup without really having to continue investing my time and effort into fixing stuff with harvest. Now, with all of that said, is this a janky setup that is worth doing? Well, I will admit that it is a bit hard to play with. It is definitely on the squishy side of things. And it is also not stun immune, which is going to pile into the negatives. The mapping is decent, but it will not massively impress anyone. Other holopalmers I've built in the past do a better job. However, it does hit hard, as you've seen throughout the video. It is definitely not the hardest hitting holopalmer I've done, but it sure as hell hits hard enough to be done with most bosses relatively fast. Granted, I did make mistakes here and there fighting some of these bosses, like flame dashing into the storms on Sirius's arena or face tanking the cascade in Maven's circus, so while the DPS is rather solid, eating damage is definitely not what I'd recommend doing. But with all honesty, this was an experiment, because crits on a holopalmer are definitely a tough challenge. You sacrifice a lot of suffixes that you could use for resistances or more dexterity for crit chance and crit multi. And at the end of the day, the assassin is gonna be your best choice for building this kind of character, since his ascendancy is all about critical hits, something that is going to be close to impossible to build on other characters. However, as I've mentioned in the video, Harvest is going to get nerfed next league. So going forward, depending on it to fix gear is probably not the best course of action. That doesn't mean that Harvest is going to be useless, but it won't help as much as it does today. Having said all of this, and to grab this cursed build concept, this is definitely a build that you give a shot if you are bored out of your mind. A lot of things are working against it, and while the end product is rather decent at fighting bosses, it is going to prove a bit too janky to be worthwhile in the end, but that is a judgment that is yours to make. Anyways, the league is dying down, and the next one's announcement is right around the corner, which is great because I am definitely done interacting with Ritual. Having said that, I am severely thinking giving Outriders a shot when it comes out, since we'll more than likely have enough time to play that before 3.14 comes out. but it all depends on the release date for that league. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching tonight's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the channel, otherwise a rating and a comment are always appreciated. Take care, have a nice start to your week, and peace out.